At last, the cog Onyx had been fitted out and prepared for her voyage. Her captain, William Bertrand, prepared nervously to make his way to the Siren Song Harbour Master's office in the hopes of getting a contract for carrying a shipment of cargo across the sea to its destination. This was the make or break moment, the final straw. A failure to secure a contract would be the ruin of William Bertrand and his family. And when William Bertrand first stepped into the Harbour Master's office, the man behind the desk simply ignored him, continued writing in his ledgers his notes for shipments to and from other islands. William waited patiently until at last the Harbour Master put down his pen and looked up to fix William with his gaze. And so William went into his planned and indeed rehearsed speech. "Good morning, sir. I'm very sorry to bother you. I'm the new captain of the cog Onyx, and I was wondering if..." "Oh, you're the captain of cog Onyx, are you?" the Harbour Master suddenly interrupted. "Whatever happened to Captain Christopher?" Captain Christopher, I'm afraid, did not survive the war. He and I were childhood friends, and he left me the cog Onyx in his will," William explained, somewhat taken aback by the mention of his dear friend's name. "Oh, right, the war. I'm very sorry to hear that, I really am. Well, if there's a contract you're after, I'm afraid I can't really help you see. It's our rule in this area now, across all the islands. We're only here now giving contracts out to sailors from these here islands. I'm sure you understand, if we start giving out contracts to anyone who comes knocking, we'll be flooded under in no time." William now made one last throw of the dice. "Oh, but sir, you see, I am from the islands. I was born here, right here on Siren Song. My father was a sailor, you see. My father was also William Bertrand, and, well, he gave his life to the sea, and my mother took us away to the kingdom, to the mainland." "What, no, you're not Billy Bertrand's boy, are you? Well, bless my soul, last time I saw you, you were about that high," the Harbour Master had said, holding his hand up flat at about waist height. "Well, of course I remember your father well. Well, that changes things. Of course I can give you a contract. In fact, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put a message out across the sea to the other islands to tell them that the cog Onyx now sails under the captaincy of a local lad, none other than the son of Billy Bertrand." William was of course overjoyed. "Oh, thank you, sir. That's awfully kind of you. That's so good of you. Thank you so much." "Well, you're most welcome, of course. Just remember, your reputation is in your own hands, however. You might be able to get work, but make sure you get your deliveries on time, or else I can't help if my colleagues don't want to deal with you." "Oh, yes, of course, sir. I totally understand." William had secured 2 contracts, both going to Fay Valley, an island just nearby. The perfect place for a trial run with the cog Onyx, carrying a cargo, crates of North fish and other seafood. And so William quickly got to work, loading up the ship and preparing for sea. He knew that as he did this, he must not glance up to the top of the cliff. He could feel the eyes of his family boring down into him from up there, where they watched him loading his ship. And he knew that their faces would be tear-stained, their white handkerchiefs fluttering in the wind. He knew that with one glance, all of his determination to see this through would leave him, and his new career would be over before it had even begun. But at last, the ship was loaded, the cargo stored away, and due to the direction of the wind, William was required to walk the ship out to sea, using the anchor to pull the ship around off the quayside. He, of course, was not an experienced sailor, and even as the cog Onyx began to gather way, pulling towards her anchor, the stern grazed against the quayside. William may not have been an experienced sailor, but he was determined to learn the skills required for his new job, his new way of life. It was not simply about getting the cargo to its destination. This was also about survival. The survival of William and his family, his wife, his 2 sons. At last he was ready to set sail, the jibsail halyard releasing sail and belayed using the jib sheet, even as William trimmed the sail. The cog Onyx began to gather way and move out to sea. Only now that he was committed could William spare one last look at his family, waving to him from atop the cliffs. And they looked exactly as he knew they would, faces lined with tears, all 3 waving their handkerchiefs out the window of their home. William simply stood on the deck of the aft castle, one hand held up, saying goodbye, before turning about and going back to his duty. And so had begun William Bertrand's nautical career. He had not wanted to go to sea. He didn't dislike sailing or the sea itself, but he had spent so much time away from his family in recent years that all he wanted was to spend time with his wife and children. He had been born in Sirensong. His father had been a trusted, reliable and popular sailor in the waters around the islands, until he and his ship had been lost in one of the most dreadful storms ever recorded in the region, and William's mother, heartbroken, had left the island, taking William, a young child at the time, away to the mainland, to the kingdom, with hopes of living a new life. And William had had a rather miserable upbringing. His mother had done her best, but she had remained grief-stricken to her dying days. And finally, coming of age, William had been called into the king's service. He had fortunately already met the woman who had become his wife at that point, and not long after their second son had been born, war had been declared, and William had gone off to fight as a member of the king's army. And when, after several years of fighting, the war had come to an end, William returned home, his employment within the king's army at an end, and looking forwards to a joyous reunion with his wife and children, found nothing but disappointment in the kingdom. His long-awaited reunion spoilt when William had learned of the curse that he had inherited whilst away on campaign. That same curse was now about to carry him across the sea to the other islands of the Estuarine group, but ultimately away from his wife and 2 sons, both of whom hardly knew him really after years of war, and knowing this truly broke William's heart. The cog Onyx was making good headway towards her destination, Fay Valley, sailing on a beam reach, the wind hard on the starboard beam. And William reflected that the ship could not by any means be called a fast vessel. After all, she only carried 2 sails, her jib staysail and the square mainsail, only useful when wind was abaft the beam, that is, coming from the rear of the ship towards the front. And so reflecting on this, and of course reflecting on his own sailing abilities, William knew that as soon as he was able, he would take the ship into a shipyard for refit and the installation of new sails. After all, cogs were now quite obsolete. Cutters, sloops and schooners were, these days, the desired vessels to get about in this part of the world, and so William planned that the cog Onyx would be refitted, most likely as a cutter or a schooner in time. But for now, he would have to go with what he had. After all, seeing as William, his wife and children had fled from the kingdom in a tearing hurry, they had very little money to their name. They had just about enough to secure themselves a home on Sirensong Island, and of course to fit out the cog Onyx for sea, and so really everything was riding on the success of this adventure. William could not afford a setback. It was getting somewhat late in the day when at last the cog Onyx finally reached the coastal waters of Fay Valley. The crossing had been calm and peaceful, the water like glass. William knew that he was extremely lucky in this regard, knowing full well the ferocity of a stormy sea, and so he thanked the gods of the sea for this first, almost enjoyable voyage on a calm sea. William's long-term plan, for as long as he was sailing around the Estuarine Isles, was to only sleep aboard the cog Onyx when it was absolutely necessary. Otherwise, once again, he planned to invest the money he was making in having a good night's rest in the hotels of the islands, and this would also mean that William ate well whenever he could, ensuring that he remained physically strong enough for the job. Finally, rounding the headland and pointing the vessel towards the quayside at Fay Valley, William prepared for docking. Fortunately, the wind was only slight this evening, otherwise he would have to consider himself to be perilously close to that most disastrous of things for all sailors, a leeward shore. And something William had to ensure that he reduced as best he could was wear and tear on his vessel. Over time, Even slight bumps against quaysides and docks would cause damage to the ship's timbers, and thus requiring more time in shipyards' hands. And time in this world was of course money. Fortunately, William still had a great deal of time before the cargo was due for its delivery, and so there was absolutely no need to rush to docking the vessel. He could take his sweet time, ambling up to the quayside and safely mooring the vessel, and having furled the jibsail, he let the cog simply drift towards the quayside, slowly losing her way as she did so. And so, taking up the stern mooring line, William ran forward and prepared to jump across the short gap between the ship and the quayside. Hopping across, he tied off the vessel to the mooring post, before doing the same again for the forward mooring line, before quickly running back to the stern mooring line to pull the rope in and so check the Onyx's way. And so the cog Onyx was successfully moored for the first time on commission under the command of William Bertrand. And of course, William wasted no time getting the cargo ashore. He was not in a rush, of course, but the sooner he unloaded the cargo, delivering it to the harbour master here at Fay Valley, the sooner he could find the inn and get some sleep. And so at last, William had done just that. First of all, introducing himself to the harbour master at Fay Valley, and quickly returning to Onyx to extinguish its lamp, William now ran off in search of the inn and his lodgings for the night. The next day, William had awoken bright and early, hoping to get a quick and early start to the day. He loaded up the Onyx with olive oil and wool, and was carrying the cargo to the nearby island of Firefly Grotto. Firefly Grotto was a rather enchanting place. The small town was located inside the island, which was effectively hollow. What could be seen from the outside was effectively a very large dome over a cavern, and inside that cavern, a small but growing town had flourished for generations. The large cavern in which the town was built had two openings, ways in and ways out of course, one facing towards the north of the island, one facing to the west of the island. And there was a large skylight in the roof of the cavern as well, and these three gaps in the crust of the island allowed enough of the outside elements, wind, rain, etc., to enter into the cavern, giving some natural sunlight to the inhabitants, as well as enough wind for ships to sail through the cavern. The town was built as the refuge for all the peoples of the Estrian Islands, in a long ago forgotten earlier age of piracy and banditry. The approaches to the cavern entrances were riddled with rocks, very dangerous places, even in a moderate spell of bad weather. And so the island made effectively the perfect fortress for the people of the Estrian Islands. Of course, Firefly Grotto had not been used as such a refuge in generations. Hundreds of years had passed since it was last used as a fortress. These days, it had become an important mining and trading town. Mining and trading in various different elements like copper and sulphur. And it was as William passed through the narrow passage that led towards the northern entryway into the cavern that he considered how regular visits to Firefly Grotto could indeed help him gain a good deal of money, once he had improved his reputation enough to be able to buy and trade goods in his own right, and not simply carry cargoes for other traders from one port to another. The elements being sold and traded out of Firefly Grotto were worth quite a bit of money. Upon entering the cavern, William was rather amused to see that the water falling off the roof of the cavern was falling just as strongly as the rain falling from the sky outside the cavern. A rather curious phenomenon to say the least. But now William had to concentrate. He would have to tack through the eye of the wind so that he could approach the quayside and begin unloading Onyx. This was going to be his first proper tacking of Onyx on his own. In the past, he had always made use of the anchor, throwing it out as far as he could manage and using the winch to pull the ship around onto the new heading. But now he put the wheel over to starboard, gave the leeward jib sheet a good deal of slack, and waited as the ship's way pulled round into the eye of the wind. The jib flapped quite dangerously, This was not very tidy, of course, but by tightening the starboard jib sheet winch, he managed to gain control of the flapping jib sail, and the Onyx settled on her new course, now on the port tack. The very mysterious wind inside the cabin, now blowing onto the Onyx's port side from the direction of the small town. And minutes later, William was furling the sail and was letting the Onyx gently glide in, slowly losing her way, closing ever more slowly with the jetty. William now spent a very quick bit of time bailing out the water that had been accumulating in the bottom of the boat. At this point, the Onyx was quite watertight, but of course, it couldn't help the torrential downpour falling upon the deck. And William wanted to make sure that water levels were kept at an absolute minimum all the time if possible. This having been done, he now got on with unloading the vessel, removing the olive oil and the wall, putting it on the quayside, ready to be taken over to the harbour master's office. And to William's shock and surprise, the name of the deputy harbour master was Bertrand de Sully, none other than William's cousin. The two men had of course spent a good deal of their childhood together before William and his mother left the islands. And though if they were to pass each other in the street, they would likely not recognise each other, William had seen the name on the door, but Pierre had also had forewarning of William's presence in the region. The harbour master of Siren Song had of course sent out a message to all of his colleagues, detailing that the son of Billy Bertrand had returned to the Astron Islands and was at last following in his father's footsteps as a merchant sailor around the islands. And so Pierre expected to see William at some point in the coming days, and at last here he was, standing right in front of him. Their reunion was of course very happy, but emotional nonetheless, and William also had the pleasure of being introduced to Pierre's superior, the harbour master of Firefly Grotto, a very kindly man, an experienced sailor from the far north. Of course, Mr. Bertrand, I remember your father well. He was sorely missed, and things are never to see him again after the sea had taken him. Thank you, sir. That's very kind of you to say, was all William could say in response. It was beginning to seem to him that the people around the islands had known William's father far better than even William did. And as it turns out, the harbour master was hosting a dinner party later that evening, a dinner party traditional to the Astron Islands, and he insisted that William should attend as his most honoured guest. The next morning, William had secured a contract to ship 3 barrels of sulphur to Fort Astron, the capital of the Astron Islands. The sulphur barrels were rather heavy, and William was still quite fatigued. He had not had a lot of sleep. The dinner party from the night before had gone long into the night, as was tradition, and though these parties are never particularly raucous in nature, it was customary to drink a great deal of mead, and so William was somewhat tired and sluggish on this morning as he loaded up his vessel, making sure it was in good trim with the heavy sulphur barrels. There was still something of a storm blowing outside the cabin, and William could not tell from here what the sea state was outside. Getting the trim right was very important for the Onyx's stability. He'd already said goodbye to his cousin, promising that he should return very soon, and as William had already planned, coming to Firefly Grotto would become a regular occurrence for him, as the items for trade or transportation were of the far more lucrative, albeit heavy kind. At last, William unmoored the vessel and set the jib sail, preparing to depart. The Onyx gained a small amount of sternway before William trimmed the sail by pulling on the jib sheet, and at last the vessel got underway. Despite William's fatigue, he would need to concentrate. The seas outside the Western Passage were particularly treacherous. William distinctly remembers his father explaining how that small area outside the cabin was one of the most dangerous patches of sea in the entire Astron Islands. Many ships had been lost, smashed onto the reefs or into the rocks, the huge rocks protruding from the sea, reaching up towards the sky. The locals called these rocks Aegir's Fingers. Aegir is, of course, one of the gods of the sea, a giant who in fact is said to be the personification of the sea. Married to Ram, the goddess who keeps the spirit of those lost at sea, held deep down under the waves, deep within her hull. William's own father now resided down there, and of course, though William wished, like many people often wish, to see his father again, he had a lot to live for and did not wish for such a reunion at this time. And so his instincts forced him to concentrate on the job at hand, sailing carefully past the reefs and the rocks and out into the open ocean. But of course, William was sailing into a westerly wind. That is to say that the wind was coming from the west, blowing towards the east. And this of course made sailing the Onyx out westwards rather difficult. And with her current sail plan, the cog Onyx did not make for a particularly weatherly ship. And all these factors combined meant that William had to very carefully sail the Onyx out through the narrowest passage within the reefs and the rocks. For he had no room to tack nor really to jibe, without risking being blown onto a lee shore, as in fact directly to leeward was a huge rock. And so William chose his line, sailing for the small gap between a reef and one of Aege's fingers, and committed himself to passing through this small passage. Fortunately, it was high tide, meaning that there was a good deal more water between the rock and the reef. However, this came with its own potential circumstances. Should William run the Onyx aground, he may be stranded there until the next high tide, before he could pull his vessel off the land. But for now, that didn't really bear thinking about. He just concentrated on passing through the narrow passage, doing so with mere meters really to spare on either side of his vessel. But now of course, space opened up in front of him and he could relax all the more. With the wind now veering to the southwest, ironically the direction William wished to go, he decided to hold his more westerly course, heading further out to sea, getting as much sea room as he could spare before wearing the ship round onto a southerly course and heading off towards Fort Astron. Now, with time to relax more, William once more ran through the events of the previous evening. It had been a good party, sure, but it had almost been spoilt by one character at the gathering. The guests at the party were from all over the kingdom and the Astron Islands, and William's cousin had done the honourable thing, introducing him to every single person at the party, until at last he came to a man that almost ruined everything. Mr. Fitzberry, I'd like to introduce you to my cousin. This is William Bertrand, captain of the cog Onyx. William, this is Cecil Fitzberry, a trader from the kingdom. Actually, sir, I'm the owner of my own trading company, not merely a trader. Calling me a trader just makes me sound like a mere sailor. Thinking back on those words alone, William feels he would have been more than justified if he had confronted the man there and then, perhaps even called him out. If he had known then what he found out afterwards, he probably would have done so. The man had no friends. He was very unpopular with the people of the Astron Islands. But for now, William put this missed opportunity to the back of his mind. He was wearing ship, or jibing, turning away from the wind to bring the ship's stern round into the wind, and continuing all the way around to bring the ship onto the starboard tack, and so setting a new course south for Fort Astron. William had paired well and had given himself a great deal of sea room in order to carry out this manoeuvre. However, his inexperience did show through, as the Onyx came round, making a great deal of leeway before the wind. William realised that he really shouldn't have slackened off the leeward jib sheet, as if preparing to sail before the wind. Doing so meant that the Onyx's turning circle was huge, and even as the wind caught in the jibsail and carried it straight across the deck to the starboard tack, William realised that his poorly executed manoeuvre may in fact bring him extremely close to the shore of Firefly Grotto, from whence he had just come. But he quickly got on with trimming the sail as the ship continued its leisurely starboard turn towards the south. And before long, William had the ship back in order, sailing on course towards Fort Astron. Unfortunately, the wind had continued to veer towards the south, and once again, the Onyx was sailing very close to the wind, moving at a very slow speed, as once again she was not a particularly weatherly ship. But this important manoeuvre done, William could once again return his mind to his reminiscence of the previous evening. William's mind once again returned to that nasally, weasel-like voice, as the man droned on about how he hated the sea how great he was at trading, how great he was at business, etc., etc. Oh, that's right. You own your own group now, don't you? I guess having friends in high places helps a lot, doesn't it? Pierre said, winking at William mischievously. Actually, no. I worked hard for what I have. I worked extremely hard. I didn't get any help. Nobody helped me. I got no handouts from anybody. At this, Pierre's smile quickly vanished. Oh, come now, Cecil. I know your background. You come from a well-to-do family and you got most of your fortune messing about with the sea fencibles during the war. At the mere mention of the sea fencibles, William's hackles rose. His entire body visibly stiffened, and William straightway felt his blood begin to boil. He hated the sea fencibles, every single one of them. He could feel his face reddening as the man opposite him droned on and on about the hard work he had done during the war, and how he had served his country valiantly, until at last he caught William's eye, and his sentence slowly trailed off. Why do you look at me like that, sir? The man asked nervously. Well, I'd rather not say, but let's just say I don't much like the sea fencibles. Oh, is that so? Well, they did a good job during the war. They helped protect the country after all. They provided a very good service, the man countered arrogantly. William's temperature continued to rise. A good service, sir? I don't think so, no. A good service to themselves and their friends, perhaps. In my opinion, the sea fencibles were nothing better than pirates, and not even the sort of pirates to really put themselves in harm's way to get what they had. In fact, calling them pirates is probably too good. They are thieves to a man, and cowards, using the sea fencibles as a kind of rich man's club to stop themselves or their sons or their friends from being called into the king's service and fighting alongside real men, doing real service to the country, putting their own lives and well-being in real danger, whether they wanted to or not. Pierre turned and stared at Cecil Fitzbarry with open shock written all over his face. There was a pause until at last Cecil found the words to speak. How dare you say that to me? How dare you accuse me of being a coward or a thief? Who do you think you are? I will see you broke, sir. You will never trade again. You will never be trusted again for another contract. I'll make sure of that. He said this whilst getting closer and closer to William until they were almost nose to nose. All sound in the room had come to a very swift end at this, all eyes looking at the two men. Everyone saw the men standing almost nose to nose. They all saw William reach up and grab Cecil Fitzbarry's ear and begin shaking his head from side to side violently. They all heard the words he spoke, and all felt the fury in his voice. Broke, you say? Broke, is it? Well, I shall leave you now with two choices, sir. Beg for my pardon, or I promise you, you will be broke here and now, broke upon the floor, your body shattered. Beg for my pardon, sir, or you are a dead man. I swear it here. In front of all these witnesses, a dead man you shall be. Beg for my pardon. Get off, you're going to pull my ear off. The man squirmed feebly, trying to pull William's hand away from his ear. And all guests in the room watched on, many with satisfied looks upon their faces. Including, as it turns out, the harbour master, who was the host of the party. William pulled the man's ear very close to his mouth, growling, Beg for my pardon, sir, or you are a dead man. Loud enough so that everyone can hear it. Okay, I beg your pardon, sir. It was a poor joke. I'm sorry. And with that, William immediately let go and turned to his cousin. Pierre, a cup of mead with you. And the two cousins walked off to find another drink, leaving Cecil Fitzbarry shamed and in very visible discomfort. The party continued, and William approached the harbour master to apologise for the commotion. It's quite alright, young man. I appreciate the entertainment, especially if Cecil Fitzbarry is on the receiving end. And so, the dinner party continued upon its course, just as William did in the Onyx, continuing south through the night towards Fort Astron. And as William approached the distant port, he couldn't help but reflect upon the conversation he had had with the harbour master, who, following his quarrel with Cecil Fitzbarry, had come forward to ask him the inevitable question. "Please forgive my impertinence, sir, but I have to ask. Well, there's not many a man here who has a good word to say about the sea fencibles, but you, sir, have pure fire in your eye the moment they are mentioned. I feel quite certain that only a man who has been on the receiving end of their antics could bring himself to harbour such fury towards them. And so I'm naturally curious. What is it that the sea fencibles have done, sir, to make you so angry towards their existence?" William thought for a moment before answering. "No, sir, your question is not impertinent at all. This is your party after all." And, slowly at first, William went into the story as to what the sea fencibles had done to effectively ruin his life. And even as he told the story, both Pierre and the harbour master felt their own blood temperature rising at the injustice of it all. When William had finished his tale, the harbour master placed one hand on his shoulder. Looking him in the eye, he promised to do everything within his power to ensure that William had a chance at making it as a merchant sailor. At long last, the party had wound up and began to draw to a close, when, to William's surprise and indeed his shock, the harbour master, the host, had turned to him and said, "Captain Bertrand, I'm sure you're fully aware of the immemorial custom of the Ashton Islands, but as host, I am obliged to ask one of my guests to end the party with a song. Might you be so kind as to provide us with a song, sir?" William, somewhat overcome by shyness, tried to refuse. "I'm very, very sorry, sir, but my voice would not do. It would ruin the party, I'm sure, sir." But William's cousin was not having it. "Come now, cuz, you know the custom. It's not the voice that is important, it's the song itself that matters." And so William reluctantly agreed. And warning you all, it will not be very prettily sung, he decided to sing a rather melancholic folk song, well known amongst sailors of the kingdom and the Ashton Islands. For William, it was of course a rather poignant tune, given what had happened to his father. He slowly made his way through the verse and the chorus until at last he came to the final lines of the song. "From northern ice to southern spice, the seafarers sail free. Beneath the waves the fallen's graves, forever they shall be. From northern ice to southern spice, the seafarers sail fine. Away from shore the heroes roar, in Run's deep hall they dine. In Run's deep hall they dine." William couldn't help but smile at the recent memory. It was after all something that was very much out of character for him, and perhaps it was a sign of things to come, a new beginning. But at long last he had reached his berth at Fort Ashton, and he carefully moored up his vessel in preparation for unloading. He remembered visiting Fort Ashton as a child, excited at the hustle and bustle of the capital of the islands. Of course, it didn't hold a patch on the busyness that you would see in the cities in the kingdom, but for the humble people of the Ashton Islands, Fort Ashton was the nearest thing to city life. And William wasted no time in unloading the sulphur from his ship. He had been rather tired when setting out from Firefly Grotto, but had gotten his second wind on the journey south. But now, deep in the night, he was quite exhausted. He looked forward to completing the contract and heading off to find his lodgings in a nearby inn. His first week at sea was not yet complete. William was only 4 days into his new life, but already he had remade acquaintances and new ones. Mostly good acquaintances that he would cherish. But with the good comes the bad, of course, and William would try and put those out of his mind. At last he found his lodgings and settled in for the night. A job well done. Thank you ever so much for watching this first part of my new series. I really hope you enjoyed the story. Please do subscribe for more and leave a comment telling me what you think. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up, it helps the channel immensely. Thank you very much, have a good day.